My name is Melvin. I'm 71 years old and have a life full of silences, memories, and some disappointments that still hurt as if they had happened yesterday. Tell me something. What would you do if you gave your all for someone's happiness? And even so, you saw this person being erased inside your own home. Sometimes we believe so much in the power of love, of family, that we close our eyes to the signs. He thinks he's doing the right thing, and he is. But not everyone sees their sacrifice as sacred. There are people who step on it, that takes over, that invades, and that's exactly what happened to me. I built a lifetime thinking about the good of my daughter, Hannah. After I lost my wife, she was all I had left. I promised myself on my wife's deathbed that Hannah would never be alone. So I sold part of what I had and bought her a house, a home, or at least that's what I thought. What I didn't know was that when I opened that door, I was letting in something that was going to change everything. And in the end, it only took one sentence to get them all out of there. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. There was a moment when everything became clear to me. That was when I heard, with these tired ears, a sentence that cut deeper than any silence. Audrey, my son-in-law's mother, leaning against the couch in the house I bought, looked at me with that cold smile and said, "Do you think this house is hers? Here, I'm in charge." At that moment, something inside me broke and ignited at the same time. I understood what they were doing. It wasn't just a lack of respect. It was an invasion. It was dominance. And that's when I decided, I'm not going to raise my voice, but I'm going to raise her world again. Before continuing, if this story has ever touched any wounds inside, if you've given everything and been treated like nothing, I wanted to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. Leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not just a button. It's a gesture that shows me that I'm not alone, that there are still people who value those who love in silence, who protect with the little they have. And now, if you're ready, let me tell you how it all started. I remember that day as someone who remembers the smell of bread baking in childhood, with a mixture of joy and something strange in the air. I had just picked up the keys from the Stamford registry office. The deed was in the name of my daughter, Hannah. All done with the care of those who plant a tree for shade to last generations. I went to the market, bought flowers and a simple but decent wine. I drove to the house with my heart full of plans. It was a 2-story house with a white facade, a balcony with a beautiful view, and a garden that asked for roses, my wife's favorite flowers. And Hannah too. She always said that she wanted to plant roses in the backyard since she was a little girl. When I arrived, Hannah was already there, standing in the entrance. Her smile was small, but it was there. She hugged me tightly, and I felt a slight trembling in her hands. I attributed that to emotion. I handed over the set of keys as if it were a living heritage. "It's yours now, daughter, your home." She thanked her softly, but before we could get in, I heard the noise of the engine behind me. We both became at the same time. It was a brand new black SUV that stopped close to the sidewalk. 3 people got out of there. Audrey, Craig's mother, dressed as if she were a Manhattan madam, with huge sunglasses and a scarf around her neck. Then came his brother Trent, with the face of someone who didn't want to be there. And finally an aunt, whose name I never knew, who had already come carrying a box of kitchen utensils. "Ready for change?" shouted Audrey, spreading her arms as if she owned the land. Hannah smiled, without showing her teeth. Craig walked out the front door with an impatient manner, waved his hand at me without getting close, and went back inside. No one greeted me properly. I stood there, holding the flowers, not knowing if I was welcome at that moment or just another extra. "This space is going to serve all of us well," Audrey said as she scanned the entrance to the house as if evaluating a property to buy. "The kitchen seems small, but with good organization, we accommodate everything." I looked at Hannah, who pretended to tie her hair so as not to stare at anyone. Audrey passed me without looking, entering with firm steps. There, in that scene that should be the apex of my joy, I felt a stab in my chest, as if the gift I gave with so much love was being taken, diluted, distorted. But I didn't say anything. I just left the flowers on the kitchen counter, which was already starting to be taken over by pots that I had never seen in my life. I sat on the edge of the stairs and watched the movements. Craig carried boxes, but always grumbling. Audrey gave orders. That aunt cleaned closets that weren't even dirty. And Hannah, my daughter, walked from one side to the other as if she were a guest. I asked where they should put this or that, and no one answered. It was blacked out. I found myself thinking, how many parents have felt this way? How many have given what they had, only to see the door of gratitude close in their faces? It's a pain that's hard to explain, because there is no screaming, there is no fighting, there is only silence, a silence that cuts. If you've ever been through something similar, if you've ever done the best for someone and been treated as a disposable piece, write here in the comments. It can be a simple, "I've lived it," or "It touched me." Sometimes we just need to know that we are not alone in this kind of sadness. Hannah called me softly. "Dad, do you want to see the guest room?" I went. I feigned interest. She tried to smile. I tried not to show what I felt. The room was beautiful, spacious. But what caught my attention was that she hadn't said, "our room." I had said, "the one for guests," as if she knew from the beginning that this place would not be entirely hers. After an hour, Audrey began to pour wine. He offered it to Craig, his brother, his aunt. He passed me by and just said, "There's sparkling water in the fridge if you prefer." Smile. Refused. The pain inside my chest was already stronger than any sip. When I left the house, Hannah walked me to the gate. She hugged me tight and said, "Thank you for everything, Dad." I replied, "You deserve it." But inside, something told me that she deserved better than that. He deserved respect, peace, autonomy. I got in the car, started the engine, and I stood still for a few seconds, with his hands on the wheel and his eyes teary. I knew deep in my soul that that day would not be the end of the story. Something was out of place, and the worst. It's just that I felt like the worst part was yet to come, but I didn't know it would be so soon, and that would come with words sharp as a knife. Do you know when you hear something and at the time you understand that the world has turned? That's what happened, because days later I came back to that house, and it was there, right in the middle of the room, that I heard the phrase that you can't forget. Do you want to know what it was? So just wait to see what Audrey had the courage to say. In the days following that handover of the keys, everything seemed to cool down too quickly. Hannah would send me short messages just to tell me that everything was fine. But her voice, even over the phone, was always tired, as if every sentence was being measured, controlled. "It's all busy here, Dad." Then we talked calmly, and so it was. 1 week, then 2. I tried to believe that it was just the beginning of a new routine, but something did not go down. Until one Wednesday afternoon, I decided to show up there unannounced. I took an apple pie that I bought in an old bakery in Greenwich, the kind she loved when she was little. I rang the doorbell twice. It was Audrey who opened the door. "Ah, it's you," she said, as if seeing a pamphlet delivery man. And before I said anything, he was already saying, "We are in the middle of a reorganization here, but make yourself comfortable, if I can get a little space." I walked through the door, and right away I felt that it was no longer the same house. The room was filled with boxes, not of moving but of new objects, different sofas, paintings I've never seen, a bookshelf with photo frames with only photos of Craig's family. Not a picture of Hannah. No. I looked around and my daughter was not there. Craig emerged from the kitchen in a sweaty t-shirt, greeted me with a nod. "We are redecorating everything, father-in-law." Audrey thought the vibe of the house was kinda, dunno, cold. I took a deep breath. Audrey found it, not Hannah. That's when she appeared, coming from the hallway, with her hair tied up anyway, a tray of cups in her hands. "Dad, what a good surprise!" But her smile didn't reach her eyes. He hugged me lightly and started moving again, taking the coffee to the living room, serving each one as if they were an employee. "Watch out for the new rug, daughter," Audrey said. He was very expensive. And then he turned to me with that voice of false elegance. "I'm thinking of setting up my home office in the back room. The morning light there is wonderful. You'll love the result when it's ready." I just nodded. He said nothing. I walked to the kitchen and realized that her furniture had been changed. The refrigerator was new, the microwave too. I asked myself, who bought all this, and why? I went to the garage with the excuse of looking for a bottle opener. There, where there was once plenty of space, now you could hardly walk. Boxes, tools, folding chairs, stacked suitcases, clothes on an improvised clothesline. They were really settling in. Not for a while, but as someone who arrives to stay. I went back to the living room and sat on the edge of one of the sofas. Hannah poured me a cup, but she didn't sit down herself. I kept coming and going, asking if everyone was okay. Audrey talked about her old apartment in the Bronx, said that I couldn't live there anymore, too noisy. Craig, laughing, commented that they were now in a real house. No one thanked him. No one mentioned the sacrifice I had made. When Hannah tried to comment on planting roses in the backyard, Audrey cut it off. "Let's save it for spring, honey. First, we will solve the garden that I want to set up." She did not answer. She just smiled with her lips closed and lowered her eyes. I held the cup tightly, so as not to let my hands tremble. The coffee was bitter, but it wasn't the fault of the dust. It was the feeling that my daughter was being erased. And worse, that she knew, and I was trying to survive in silence. I stayed there for a short time. I said goodbye with a thank you for the coffee and left. Hannah walked me to the gate again, but this time she didn't say anything. He just gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Sorry for the mess, Dad." I just put my hand on her face and said, "You never have to apologize for anything." I got back in the car and drove to the first dead-end street, parked, and I cried. I didn't cry as a child. I cried like an old man, tired. That she knew she was losing her daughter within her own generosity. Because sometimes we try to save someone and end up pushing that person into a deeper hole. I couldn't break into that house. I couldn't scream. He couldn't force Hannah to stand up. But one thing I could observe, and that's what I did. Noticed, in silence, until the day I heard that. The phrase, that damn phrase that changed everything. Do you want to know what she said? So wait. Because what came out of Audrey's mouth that day, it wasn't just an offense, it was a declaration of war. I tried to talk to Hannah a few times after that visit. I called in the morning, sometimes at night, asked how things were, how she was feeling, if she had managed to rest. But the answers always came the same way, short, swallowed. "It's all right, Dad. I'm just a little tired, that's all." When I pressed a little more, she dodged. She said she had to hang up or that they were calling her. It didn't take a genius to realize that something was wrong. But I also learned throughout my life that not all truth is told with words. Sometimes the person is screaming inside, and we need to listen with the heart. So on any given Sunday, without starting before, I took the car and went to the house. It had been more than a month since the delivery of the keys, and something inside me said I needed to see it with my own eyes. It was late afternoon when I parked across the street. I stayed there for a few minutes, looking at the facade of the house. It looked the same on the outside, but I knew that inside a lot had already changed. I rang the doorbell, and before anyone opened it, I heard a loud, dry voice inside. "Clean that up, honey, and then see what we're going to have for dinner." It was Audrey's voice, and that darling came out of her mouth like a thorn. Hannah opened the door right away, half panting, and widened her eyes when she saw me. "Dad, you came!" I smiled slightly. I came. Craig appeared right behind, gave me a warm shake with his head and walked away. Audrey didn't even try to hide her discomfort. She sat on the couch, crossing her legs slowly, as if she wanted to mark her territory. "We're busy today, but of course you can come in a bit." entered, and I soon realized the house I bought was no longer mine, nor my daughter's. It was a territory taken. The room now had a Persian rug that, according to Audrey, was a family heirloom. The walls were filled with new paintings, portraits of Craig's parents, cousins I'd never seen, even an old Audrey diploma, framed as a trophy. In the kitchen, the refrigerator had notes with Audrey's handwriting: "Pay the plumber, buy salmon for Sunday." Hannah came to offer coffee, but seemed to walk carefully around the house, as if I was stepping on glass. When he handed me the cup, he trembled slightly. I sat down and tried to strike up a conversation with Craig. "And the work?" He shrugged. "In the same. But now, with the whole family here, we can better divide the expenses. Life is expensive for everyone, right, father-in-law?" Audrey interrupted, without even looking at me. "Yes, luckily we got a big space like that. It would be a waste to leave this house for just two." I looked at Hannah. She lowered her eyes. He said nothing. I was silent for a while, the coffee cooling in my hand, and it was then, in the midst of that silence, that Craig added, "The truth is that we had to adapt. The house is big, but with everyone there is still a lack of space. But that's okay, that's family, right? Divide." I slowly dropped the cup on the table and stared at him. "It's Hannah's house." Craig gave a forced smile. Of course, but I mean, everyone here has rights. We are also part of this." Audrey let out a chuckle in the corner, a sound that kept echoing in my head afterwards. I felt my face heat up. The blood was rising, but my voice remained calm. "Craig, do you know who paid for this house?" He looked away, pretended to look at his cell phone. Hannah got up from her chair and went to get something from the kitchen. I was running away from the conversation, and that's when the penny dropped. They had transformed the most beautiful gift I have ever given. In a kind of favor for themselves, Hannah was a guest in the house I gave away, and they acted like owners, as if they had made some sacrifice, as if they had built it with their own hands. I stayed there for another 20 minutes, without saying much. Hannah walked me to the door. Her face was pale, but she tried to smile. "Sorry for the confusion, Dad. It's all still getting ready." I lightly touched her shoulder. "Take care, daughter." I got into the car with my stomach upset. As I drove back to Greenwich, the sky began to darken, but it was inside that the darkness had already taken shape. They were erasing my daughter inside their own house. And I knew that if I didn't do anything, in a short time, she would be completely gone. But I also knew something else. They didn't know who they were dealing with, and what was about to happen. No one in that house expected it. Want to know how everything started to change? So get ready. Because the next step I took was in silence, but every detail was calculated, and none of them saw it coming. It was almost midnight when the phone rang. The display showed Hannah's name, and my heart raced. There was something in that, at the time, in the silence of the house, in the intuition of a father. I answered right away. "Father," her voice was low, choked. "Sorry to call you like that. It's just that I'm in the bathroom." I sat on the edge of the bed, turned on the lamp. "Daughter, what happened?" She breathed fast, like someone holding back her tears. I can't breathe in here anymore. It's as if, like I'm disappearing, Dad, and no one noticed." My chest tightened. "Calm down, daughter. Tell me calmly." She tried to control herself, but the words came out run over. "Audrey now gives a guess, even in my clothes. She said that dressed like this is too behaved, that I look old. And yesterday she entered the room while I was changing clothes. He didn't knock on the door, it just got in." I closed my eyes tightly. "Craig, I asked him to talk to his family so we could have some time of our own. Do you know what he answered?" She paused. The voice failed. "I said that this house is not just mine, that his father has as much right as I do, that I was selfish. Selfish, Dad." Silence took over. I could hear her sobbing on the other end of the line. "Dad, I feel like I've lost everything, even my voice." I was silent for a few seconds. He clutched his cell phone in his hand, as if that was going to change something. But at that moment, something changed inside me. I understood that it was no longer about physical space. It wasn't about furniture, nor about who slept in which room. It was about my daughter being swallowed up inside her own home, a home that I gave her with all the love that existed in me. "Do you want me to go there now?" I asked. She hesitated. "No, they will notice. I just needed to talk to someone who still saw me." Her voice was a whisper. "Thank you, Dad." And he hung up. I stood there in the dark, staring at the emptiness of the wall. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat until daylight with my hand closed on my knee, repeating his phrase in my head, "This house is not yours alone." That kept spinning inside me like a blade, and for the first time, I didn't feel old. I felt awake, seeing. Like a soldier who finally understands where the enemy is. I took a deep breath and started to think. There was no room for anger. What I needed was strategy, precision. They had settled down and thought I was just another old widower, easy to fool. But they forgot one thing. I was an engineer for 40 years. I built a building, a shipyard, built bridges where they said it wasn't possible. And now I was going to build a way out for my daughter. Slow, silent, but definitive. And if you've been listening to me this far, if any part of this story has already moved you, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm here opening my heart, telling piece by piece of my life, with everything that is beautiful and ugly too. And if you stick with me to the end, I promise you'll understand why sometimes a father's silence is worth more than any screaming. Because that night, with the phone still hot in my hand, I started planning. And the first step was to seek help, of someone who knew exactly where to touch to make their castle crumble. Do you want to know who I went to talk to first? So listen to what comes next, because this story was just beginning to turn. The next morning after that call from Hannah, I woke up slowly, my body tired, but my mind more alive than it had been in months. The house was silent, as always. The smell of the coffee I prepare myself, the rocking chair that creaks slowly on the balcony, everything seemed the same, but inside me, something had changed. I walked to the most forgotten room in the house, the small office that my wife called our trench. There was everything that was left of her, and in the middle of the shelf, among engineering books and old notebooks, was the frame with her photo, the last one before the hospital, when she was still smiling with her eyes. I sat in front of the table, put the photo there, right in front of me, and stared for a while. "You'd know what to do," muttered. But deep down, I knew she expected that from me. We've always talked about protecting Hannah. She was our world. And before leaving, my wife shook my hand and told me, "You're going to promise you won't leave her alone." At the time, I thought it was just a form of consolation. But today that promise was all that kept me standing. I remembered little Hannah running around the room with a blue crayon, drawing the dream house on the sheets I brought from the office. It was always the same image, a little house with a balcony, a flower in the garden, and a huge sun in the corner of the leaf. When I asked who lived there, she would say, "Me, you, and Mommy, and no one is in charge, only us." That was the world I wanted to give her. That's why I worked late for years. That's why I accepted projects in cities that I didn't even know how to pronounce, to ensure that my daughter had freedom, security, a real home. And now she was locked in her own silence, serving coffee as if she were a maid, taking orders from Audrey as if she didn't even own her own voice. I also thought about her wedding day. Hannah was beautiful, nervous, but happy. I remember Craig well that day. There was something about him that bothered me. A forced laugh, a habit of talking too much, looking at the other men in the family, as if he had something to prove. But out of respect for my daughter's choice, I swallowed it. Melvin, she chose, supports, doesn't get in the way. That's what I said to myself, and I supported it. I supported it too much. I delivered a house, I delivered peace, and what they gave back was contempt, silence, and pain. But now, sitting in that old chair, with the picture of my wife staring at me firmly, I felt like I couldn't wait any longer. I had already spent too much time outside watching. Now it was time to act. In silence, yes. Without shouting, without confronting, but with precision, with strategy, with truth. I looked at the frame again and said in a low voice, "Wait for me just a little longer, love. I will fulfill what I promised you." I got up, put on my flannel shirt and separated the documents I had kept since buying the house. The deed, the transfer receipts, the notary's notes, all done legally, all in her name. I kept everything in a folder and left it on the table. The next day, I was going to Stamford, and the first place I would step would be the registry office, because if someone was going to get my daughter out of that invisible prison, that someone, it was going to be me. But what I found when I got there completely changed the course of my plan. Do you want to know what I found out in that notary's office? So listen to what comes next, because there are people who think they can hide everything, but forget that role, my friend. Paper has memory. I arrived at the Stamford office very early, even before the doors opened. I sat on the wooden bench outside with the briefcase in my lap, feeling that morning chill that seems to run straight into our bones. But inside, what warmed me up was something else. The certainty that I needed to come back from there with some answer. When they called my password, I went straight to the counter. A girl with glasses, friendly, attended me. I handed in the paperwork for the purchase of the house. She looked calmly, typed into the system, and after a few minutes said to me in a calm tone, "Yes, Mr. Melvin, the property is listed here as belonging exclusively to Hannah Claire Jennings. Deed registered in her name without any restriction or co-ownership. Everything is legalized and in order." That gave me a relief that almost turned into a tear. But at the same time, it made me angry, because now it was confirmed. Craig, Audrey and the others were living there as if they had some right, when in fact they had none. None. I asked for updated copies of everything. The girl handed me the papers in a thick envelope. Before leaving, I looked her right in the eyes and asked, if someone is living in a house that is not legally theirs, against the owner's will, is there anything to do? She took a deep breath, a little uncomfortable. The ideal is to consult a real estate lawyer, sir, but in general, yes. Depending on the case, it can be configured as improper occupation. I thanked him, held the envelope tightly, and left. The wind cut my face when I got back to the car. But now, the cold no longer bothered me. I had one thing in my hand that they didn't have, truth, and more than that, now I had time. Because sometimes to get someone out of a place that is not theirs, you don't need a push. Just show that the door was never theirs, and that there are people watching. I returned home and put the documents on the table, along with my wife's photo. She still owns it. You can rest in peace with that. But I couldn't rest yet. I searched late, glasses slipping on my nose, jotting down everything in a notebook. Cohabitation laws in the state of Connecticut, notification deadlines, silent invasion rules, possibilities of civil action. I was never a lawyer, but I was always detailed. And when it comes to my daughter, every line of the law becomes ammunition. At the end of the night, I called Hannah. She answered in a low voice, as always. "Dad, is everything okay there?" I asked. She took a long time to answer. "More or less. Audrey brought a new piece of furniture today. She said it's for her home office. It's getting tight in here, but no one seems to care." I took a deep breath, looking at the papers scattered on the table. "Daughter, I went to the registry office today." She was silent. "The house is all yours. There's nothing in Craig's name, not a penny." Silence on the other side. Then a whisper. "I knew it, but to hear that, it gives me strength." "Then resist a little longer, daughter." "Are you going to get me out of here?" she asked. Her voice trembled. "Not yet," I replied firmly, "but I'm going to take them out." And at that moment, she cried, not with despair, with relief, like someone who begins to see a crack of light after a long time in the dark. And it was there that I knew, deep in my chest, that the war was just beginning. But now I had ammunition, and only one thing kept me going. I knew that the most important moment was yet to come. That hour when everything turns, in which those who thought they were in charge, he discovers that he never had anything. So, if you've come this far with me, stay a little longer, because what I found out the following week, it was the key that was missing to dismantle their castle, and it all started with a visit to an old friend of mine, a lawyer who forgets nothing. Do you know why? Because he keeps everything in detail. That Saturday, the sky was too clear for the weight I carried inside. I took the old cinnamon apple cake that I baked myself in the morning, carefully cut it, and put it in a box with a clear lid. The intention was simple: to show presence. Nothing aggressive, nothing invasive. Alone. Remember that I still existed, and that he was watching. I parked on the same street, a little further away, as I always did. I observed the facade of the house. Different curtains on the windows, a bicycle thrown in the garden, and the entrance mat was now one of those that said, "Welcome, family." I laughed inside. Family. I entered unannounced, like a father who visits his daughter on Saturday afternoon. Hannah came to open with a sad but sincere smile. He hugged me slowly. She had dark circles under her eyes, her hair tied up anyway. "Dad, it's good to see you." I lifted the cake box as if showing a simple gift. "I brought it here. Do you still remember the smell of it?" She nodded, moved. But her eyes soon drifted to the interior of the house, as if to ask, "Don't delay!" Entered. Audrey was sprawled on the couch, with a glass of white wine in one hand and her cell phone in the other. He didn't even get up. I just said, "Another surprise visit?" And she laughed to herself as if she were witty. Hannah was sweeping the room. That's right. Varendo. In a dress, barefoot, with a dish towel on her shoulder. Craig didn't show up. Not a hello, not a sign. I sat on the edge of the armchair, the same place where weeks before I heard those first crooked phrases about room for everyone. I placed the cake on top of the coffee table. Audrey didn't even look. He continued on his cell phone, and then, that's when it all happened. Hannah passed her with her broom, begging to excuse herself, and Audrey said, in that sweet tone that only those with poison in their soul know how to use, "Do you really think this is her house? Here, I'm in charge." The words entered my ears with a cruel slowness. "Here, I'm in charge." It looked like a movie scene, the muffled sound. Time standing still, the heart beating in my ear. It was there. That's when everything turned, because it wasn't just another lack of respect. It was a statement, a confession, an abuse said with pride in front of my daughter, in the house I bought with everything I had left. And she said that in front of me with a glass of wine in her hand and the look of someone who has never been challenged. I took a deep breath. I looked at Hannah, who pretended not to have heard. I continued to sit there, in silence. I smiled slightly. I got up slowly, grabbed the lid of the cake box, closed it carefully. "I'll leave it here. I'd better go." Audrey did not answer. Hannah walked me to the door. He said nothing. He just gave me a kiss on the cheek, but his eyes, they said, "You heard it, right?" And I listened, and he would never forget it. In the car, with my hands on the wheel, I stood still, for long minutes, hearing the echo of the phrase, "I'm in charge." No, Audrey, you dug your own hole. You got lost in arrogance, because there are people who do harm quietly. But you left it on record. And that's where many go wrong. Do you want to know what? When someone thinks they have mastered everything, it is usually the exact moment when they start to fall. And look, there is a kind of pain that only those who are fathers understand. To see his daughter being diminished, erased, controlled, and not being able to react right away. Because to react without strategy is to give power to the enemy. But I was no longer that passive father. I was another. And if you've ever been through something similar, if you've ever heard a phrase that took you apart inside, comment here. It can be, "I know how it is," or an "I understand you," because there is pain that only heals when we share. And after that afternoon, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. But I did, planned, and I began to draw what would be the quietest fall that family had ever seen. And do you know where it all started? For an old document that they didn't even know existed. A small detail that would change everything. Want to find out what that detail was? So wait to see what I found at the bottom of a drawer that no one touched for years. After that visit and that damn phrase that will never leave my head, I decided to disappear. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I stopped calling. I stopped visiting. Not a message, not a good morning, not a "I miss you" for Hannah. It was a studied silence, painful, but necessary, because I knew that for them, my absence would be mistaken for giving up. And that's what I wanted them to think. Craig, that noisy coward, must have thought he won. Audrey probably toasted with the same cheap wine as always, saying that the old man got tired of fighting. But it wasn't tiredness. It was focus. It was the silence before the cut. Hannah, poor thing, texted almost every day for the first week. "Dad, is everything okay? I'm worried." Then came the call. Then just the 3 dots appearing on the phone and disappearing. It destroyed me inside, but I knew I needed to stick to the plan. I needed to take the step back so that they felt too safe, relaxed, arrogant. That's when I called Sarah Brooks, a New York lawyer referred by an acquaintance from my time in civil engineering. She was an expert in family property disputes and cases of forced cohabitation, cold, direct, objective. I explained everything. I sent documents, prints, notes. She listened to me quietly and said, "Melvin, they've already crossed the line. Now we will walk calmly but accurately. And when they feel it, it's already done." These words gave me a reassurance that I hadn't felt in months. But I knew it wasn't enough. So I also hired a private investigator, a discreet, methodical fellow named Leonard, an ex-Brooklyn cop with the face of someone who doesn't waste time with small talk. I gave him a single mission: to raise everything about Craig and Audrey. TUDO. And he took it seriously. In less than a week, he sent me a report with more than 20 pages. Craig had a history of old debts, small lawsuits for default, and a note of verbal abuse at an old job. Audrey. Audrey had 2 registered names, and in one of them, a fraudulent bankruptcy filing made 10 years ago in another state. I read it calmly, as if reading one's own salvation. I printed, organized, covered each sheet in plastic. I made separate folders, one with the deed to the house, another with the documents from the registry office, and one with just their dossier. I started to put together a cold, logical, precise puzzle. No screaming, no threat, only paper, proof, law. And in the midst of it all, I began to remember something I learned from my wife in our difficult times. You don't fight with anger, you fight with strategy. Anger blinds you, calm guides you. It was with this calm that I was going to return my daughter to her place, at the center of life itself, not as a guest, but as an owner. And that night, after arranging everything, I went to the bathroom, washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror, and said in a low voice, "They think I'm quiet, but it's just the silence before the cut. Because everything that is built on lies collapses at the first breath of truth, and the first breeze was already blowing." Now, do you want to know what happened when I delivered the first notification without them knowing where it came from? Get ready, because when the letter arrived, the floor of the house shook, and no one understood where the blow came from. The first meeting with Dr. Sandra McCarthy was in a glass-enclosed room on the 8th floor of an office building in White Plains. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a look that wouldn't look away. There was something about that woman that reminded me of my wife. Firmness without arrogance. I spread my navy blue folder on the table, opened it carefully, and showed, one by one, the documents I had gathered. The deed in Hannah's name. The photos of the house completely changed, with paintings of Craig's family and the furniture that Audrey brought. Messages Hannah sent me, the ones that said, "I feel invisible," and "I don't seem to live here anymore." Every sentence was a wound. But now they were also proof. Dr. Sandra examined everything calmly. Sometimes he took notes. Other times he just nodded with a dry, technical When he finished, he rested his hands on the paper and said, "Melvin, legally, this house is 100% your daughter's. The presence of the son-in-law's family without formal authorization constitutes undue occupation. Hannah may, at any time, issue a notice demanding immediate departure." I stared at her for a few seconds, and I nodded slowly. "I know. But I don't just want them to leave. I want them to realize what they did. I want them to lose control. Not by force, but for the shame. By conscience." She crossed her arms and looked at me more closely. "You want to do it the elegant way, then? The way my wife would do it?" She smiled sideways. "So we will need more proof. More than photos and messages. We need reports, witnesses, and the right time. Because when we squeeze, it will be so that I don't let go anymore." I agreed with a nod. We exchanged a few more details, and she gave me a list of what I should collect. Audios, images of the movement inside the house, records of accounts in the name of third parties, informal testimonies from neighbors, everything that showed that who was in charge there. She wasn't my daughter. I left that building lighter, not because it was solved, but because now I had direction, strategy, and a strong woman's name by my side, just like the one who once slept by my side for 40 years. That night, I sat on the porch of my home in Greenwich, with a strong coffee in my hands. The wind shook the trees in the yard, and I thought about everything. I thought about how much my daughter endured in silence, how much I let it go, thinking it was just a phase, and how much I needed to be firm now without being cruel. Because when the good decides to fight calmly, evil does not know where to hide. And look, if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. This makes more difference than you think. There is still a lot to tell. Very much so, because after that day, I started walking with my head held high through the streets of my daughter's neighborhood, talking to neighbors, asking how things were going there. And you can't imagine what I found out about Audrey. A small detail, but that it was going to become a bomb. Want to know what it was? Just wait to see the next part, because that's where their castle starts to crack, and it's not even for justice yet. It is by the very poison that they have spread. His name was Mark Halpin, a silent guy, a direct look, one of those who say little but see everything. He was recommended to me by an old friend from the time when I was still working with Great Works, and it only took 20 minutes of conversation for me to know that he was the right guy. I gave him what I already had, and asked for the rest. I want to know where she came from, what it hides, what no one else knows. He just answered with a nod and told me, "Give me a week." But it didn't even take that. Within 4 days, the phone rang. It was him. The voice dried on the other end. "Mr. Melvin, I got something that you will want to see calmly." We met in a discreet cafe near the train station. He opened the brown folder on the table and took out the papers as if pulling a dirty bedsheet. It started slowly. In 2013, Audrey was evicted from an apartment on Long Island. Lawsuit for non-payment of rent, accumulated arrears, and attempt to hide assets at the hearing. Everything archived, but recorded. I took a deep breath. Mark turned another page. 3 years later, a legal dispute with a former partner in a small event organization company. The partner alleged embezzlement of funds and tampering with contracts. The case was never solved, but Audrey left the company soon after. Another page, another bomb. There is also an old lawsuit from 1998 when she still used her maiden name. Falsification of documents at an insurance agency. She was acquitted, but the record is here. Name case number, court. And then he took the photos. He handed it to me slowly, as if he knows the weight of what he is going through. Audrey, wearing sunglasses, entering a hotel in Brooklyn. Next to her, a much younger man, hair too neat, clothes too lined to be casual. He is a real estate broker. They have a track record. They were already seen together in 2017. This hotel there, according to the manager, they have been going to for months. And Craig, good. Craig, that same day, was in Stamford, supervising the delivery of furniture. I thought my heart was going to jump out of my chest, but instead, it was filled with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Mastery, control. It was not revenge. It was justice, in silence. Audrey wasn't just arrogant, it was dirty, and the most curious. She pretended so much that she was superior, that she would never imagine that the past was still standing, ready to pull the rug. I kept everything, carefully. I separated copies, organized them in a red dossier, and I said to myself, this is not going to be used in anger. It will be used when she is smiling louder, when you think you've won. Because the hardest fall is always the one that comes after the most arrogant rise. And look, if you think you've seen it all so far, wait a little longer. The most memorable part is yet to come. That hour when the truth appears not with shouts, but with documents. And when I tell you what was in Audrey's name, hidden for more than 20 years, you will understand why she should never have crossed my path. And that's what I discovered. By accident. Want to know where? In the most unlikely place possible. Inside a bank drawer. It was a golden afternoon, one of those that make the sky seem calmer than we do inside. Hannah and I went together in my car. She barely spoke along the way. I just stared out the window, clasping my hands in my lap. I could feel her heart pounding without even having to touch it. When we stopped in front of the house, she hesitated. Dad, will it work? I looked at her steadily, like in the times when she was afraid of the dark. It doesn't have to work today. It just needs to start working. We descend slowly. She held my arm. We walked together to the door, like two returning to something that should never have been taken away. Audrey answered with her usual gaze, from above. She had that exaggerated red robe and the glass of wine in her hand, as if she were the owner of a palace. "What did you come to get now?" he said, as if spitting. Craig was lying on the couch, controlling the video game with the face of someone who thought everything was a game. But when she saw Hannah come in behind me, her chin up, he changed his look. I took the envelope out of my jacket. "We didn't come to get anything. Just leave it here." I stretched it out slowly. Craig took it with disdain. Audrey approached, still laughing through her nose. When he opened it and saw the copy of the deed, the legal notification, and the improper occupation clause printed with a notarized signature, the laughter disappeared. Audrey tried to speak but choked on her words. That doesn't mean anything. This house was given. You can't just—" "I didn't come to take anyone out today," I interrupted calmly. "But I came to warn you that the count has begun. And everything in here is now registered." She stepped forward, but I continued. "Every change without authorization, every night slept here, every expense made in her name, every abuse, everything is documented, everything will be used, and when the time comes, it will be by law, not because of anger." Craig threw the papers on the couch, as if he wanted to take the weight off his hands. But what marked me the most, it was Hannah. She stayed by my side. Not behind, not hiding. For the first time, he did not lower his eyes, and when Audrey tried to get past her, as if nothing had happened, Hannah just didn't get out of the way. They stood there, face to face. Two women, but only one was the owner of the house, and everyone in that room felt it. At that moment, I stopped. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the environment that one day I imagined with the smell of cake and a child's voice, but which had become a theater of control, and I felt it. I felt that that memory would stay forever inside me, because there are moments in life that mark us with fire, and no matter how much time passes, they come back with smell, color, and sound. If you also have a moment like this, keep it here with me. Share in the comments. Tell me if you've ever experienced anything similar, or if you know someone who has lived. Sometimes sharing is the most beautiful way to heal. And when Hannah and I left, she was still shaking. But it was no longer fear. It was the body adapting to courage. And I knew it was just the beginning, because what Audrey didn't know, it's just that before she fell, she would still hear her own voice being used against her, word for word. And that's what I'm going to tell you about now. The next day, the phone rang early. Unknown number. I answered with that cautious silence that we learn after 60. It was Craig. His voice came a little forced, with a tone that wanted to sound friendly, but he couldn't hide the poison behind. "Mr. Melvin, I think we can talk, right? Avoid all this wear and tear." I kept quiet. I let him continue. "You see, Hannah and I always had an agreement. Verbal, of course, but she knows. I did a lot in that house. I renovated the garden, changed the curtains, helped with the plumbing. The house is hers on paper, but it was built with mutual effort." I listened. I just listened. I left my cell phone recorder on the table without him knowing. He continued. "If this whole process goes forward, I can claim co-ownership. I can call a lawyer. It can become a long, expensive, exhausting process for everyone. That's not what you want, right?" He paused, waiting for me to tremble, that I would give in. But I took a deep breath, looked out the kitchen window, and answered with the calm that only comes when you already know the end of the game. "Craig, do you really want a judge to see what your mother is doing in Times Square hotels on Tuesdays? I can give you the addresses if you want." On the other end of the line, silence. A thick, heavy silence that cut through the air. It wasn't a scream. It was not a threat. It was just the naked truth, peeled, thrown in the middle of the table. If you want to go down that path, we can go. But what will come out of this is not just about the house. It's about what's hidden underneath it. "Are you sure about that?" He swallowed, I heard. And then he hung up, without another word. In that second, I knew. For the first time, Craig felt fear. True fear, because until then he was sure he was dealing with an old fool, a fragile father, an emotionally shaken widower, someone easy to bend. But he discovered too late that those who lived an entire war alongside a strong woman. He is not frightened by the screams of a boy. And that day, I started to rewrite the narrative. With evidence, with dignity, and with the silence that speaks louder than any threat. But there was still a missing piece of this puzzle, one that I didn't even imagine. And she appeared in the most unlikely place, when someone from Craig's own family came to me. "Do you want to know who it was? And what did you tell me? So prepare your heart, because that next part, it will change everything." The letter came out in the mail on a Monday morning. Registered letter, return receipt requested, letterhead of Dr. Sandra's office, signed by Hannah, witnessed by me. The envelope was simple, white, but it carried inside it the weight of everything we had lived through, and everything we decided not to accept anymore. 10 days. That was the deadline for Audrey and Craig to vacate the house. No favor, no negotiation, no theater of pity. It was cool, it was clear, and it was definitive. On the same day that the acknowledgement of receipt was signed, the silence in the house ended. Craig called Hannah at work, screaming. He called her ungrateful, manipulated, said that she was letting herself be poisoned by the old man. Hannah, for the first time, did not answer. Hung up. Audrey did what she always knew how to do, pretend that nothing was happening. He continued walking around the house in his red robe, calling Hannah my flower, and making venomous comments as if blowing perfume. But inside, I knew she was already feeling the floor swaying. And that's when the game really turned. Because coexistence, which was already bad, turned into a cold war within those walls. Craig started fighting with his own mother. Audrey went to sleep in the living room, saying that the atmosphere in the room was heavy. Hannah sent me short but direct messages. They're freaking out. They don't know where to run. In one of them she wrote, "Dad, it's like the house is spitting them out." And I understood what she meant. Because when the truth settles in a place where there was only a lie, everything begins to creak. The furniture, the eyes, the voices. Audrey tried the last trick. He called Hannah to talk to herself in the kitchen. He closed the door. He tried emotional blackmail. She said she was going to be homeless, that the whole family was going to fall apart, that she was betraying her own blood. But Hannah, my girl, he just stared. He waited for Audrey to finish the monologue, took out his cell phone, and replied with the calm of someone who had learned from his father, "The house is mine, and I want my house back." And he left, without shouting, without apologizing, no turning back. There I knew she was ready, and I also. I didn't show up there anymore. I only watched from afar. I talked to Dr. Sandra, organized the next steps, and let the implosion happen the way it needed to happen, from the inside out. Because sometimes the best way to clean a house, it is to let the dirt fight among itself until it dissolves, and that's what happened. But what no one expected, it's just that in the midst of all this confusion, an old secret, kept for more than 20 years, would come out of the mouth of someone unlikely. And when this person came to me, I understood that their castle was not only going to collapse, it was going to crumble in front of everyone. Do you want to know who it was? And what did you tell me? So hold on tight. Because the next chapter is not just about justice, it's about revelation, one of those that change everything. The notification deadline ended on a Friday of light rain. Those slow drops that seem to carry the weight of time, as if the sky itself were watching the end of a lie. I knew that the walls of that house were already cracked, but what happened inside? No one imagined it. Hannah told me later, her eyes still wide. It all started early. Audrey woke up with a heavy gait, stumbling over her words. She tried to drink coffee as if she still had something under control, but Craig's sister, a younger girl who barely spoke, started crying out of nowhere in the kitchen. He said he couldn't take it anymore, that he was leaving, that it was all crazy. He took his bags in a hurry, leaving behind even a sandal. Audrey tried to stop her, screamed, pulled her arm, but Craig just stared, speechless. When the door slammed, silence settled for a second and exploded soon after. Craig started yelling at his mother. He said that she put him in this situation, that he believed he had the right, that now he was going to lose everything. Audrey, morning glass of wine in hand, replied with her usual venom, "Coward. You have always been a spoiled, weak boy. I did everything for you." Hannah watched, sitting on the stairs, hands in lap, eyes steady. She told me that she felt her body tremble, but she stayed. He stayed because he knew that was the fall, and she wasn't going to look away. Craig then attacked her with sharp words. "You can stop it now, just revoke the letter, to say that he no longer wants this process. The house continues to belong to everyone. You're no better than anyone else here." Hannah stood up. He walked slowly to the door of the room. "I own this house. And no, I'm not going to stop anything. I'm just getting started." Craig screamed. Audrey cried. For the first time, but not from pain, of despair. To know that control escaped. It was at that moment that I knocked on the door. I didn't tell him I was going. I just went. With the dark coat, the same as always, and a leather briefcase in hand. Hannah opened it, and when she saw me, her shoulders relaxed. I entered slowly. Craig turned red. Audrey tried to keep her pose. "What did you come to get now? Did you come to do a hero's play?" I opened the folder. I took out a single laminated sheet, one of the photos. Audrey and the broker entering the hotel in Brooklyn. I showed it to her in silence. "Is that it?" She froze. Her lips began to quiver. "Is this what you want to discuss in court?" I asked, looking her straight in the eye. The color disappeared from his face. Craig walked over and looked over his mother's shoulder. His expression faded, and in that moment, they understood. It was no longer a bluff. It was no longer supposition. It was real. It was cool. It was documented. Craig tried to say something, but only this. This has nothing to do with the house. I closed the folder. It has everything to do with it. Because you didn't just destroy a home. You have destroyed the truth. And now she's back. I looked at Hannah. She was standing, steadfast. He said nothing, but her eyes said it all. Audrey sat down, the head in his hands. Craig backed down. Neither of them had a voice after that. And I just reached out to my daughter and said, "Let's go." We left through the same door where I entered weeks before with a cake. But now we leave with dignity. And look, there are things that we live and keep. But maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up. And let's make this story reach those who need it, because the next part, it is the moment of truth, the last visit, the last sentence, and the moment when the house breathed again. Are you ready? Because it is now that justice happens. No shouting, no violence, only with truth. The morning when it all happened was ordinary. Clear skies, calm wind, that kind of day when no one expects big changes. I'd been awake for hours, drinking my coffee slowly, looking at the clock on the wall, as if knowing that sooner or later something was going to change. It didn't take long. Hannah sent me a short, unpunctuated message. "They're out." I read, reread, closed my eyes for a moment. I took a deep breath. The weight of that small text was huge. I got into the car unhurriedly and went to Stamford. When I parked in front of the house, the gate was ajar. I entered slowly, as if returning to the place where my heart almost broke. Hannah was standing in the living room, the teary eyes but the calm face. The living room was empty, not without furniture, but without presence, without the smell of arrogance, without the weight of contempt. Audrey and Craig had left without a warning, without fanfare. Only packed bags and a crumpled note on the table. "Good luck with your controlling father." Hannah handed me the paper with steady hands. He said nothing. He just looked at me, as if giving a last piece of pain. I read slowly. I smiled from the side. I put the note in my pocket and looked around. The silence of that house for the first time was good. It was a clean silence. I walked to the kitchen. I opened a drawer, saw that the cutlery was in their proper places. I walked down the hallway. The empty guest room, the office without that horrible glass table that Audrey had placed, everything in place, or rather, everything finally out of their place. Hannah came over and whispered and said, "Dad, I never knew how to breathe here, until today." I hugged my daughter, and in that hug I understood that we hadn't won with shouts, we won with roots. And there is a phrase that stuck in my head at that moment, and that may be useful for you who are listening to this now. The silence of a house that was taken and then releases is unlike any other, because it carries dignity, peace. It's true. If you've come this far listening to every bit of this story, I can only tell you, stay with me, because what comes next is the most symbolic moment of all. I walked to the living room closet, the same one where they kept the old board games, and took out a wooden box. Inside it were the old portraits, my wife, still young, holding baby Hannah in her arms, me and her on our first Christmas in the old house, Hannah's graduation. I wiped off the dust with my shirt sleeve and put the photo frames back on the bookshelf, and when I finished, I looked around and said, "Now yes, it's yours," Hannah cried. Not like before. It was a light cry, a cry of someone who opens a window after years. With the curtains closed, the light came in, and it didn't hurt. It was beautiful. It was fair. But before we close this story, there's one last thing you need to hear, because a few months later I received an unexpected visitor, and with it came the last piece of the puzzle, something that even I couldn't imagine. Want to know what it was? So get ready, because what's next changes everything, even what you think about forgiveness. The following days were smooth, almost as if the house was breathing again. I saw Hannah going from room to room, brush in hand, changing colors, taking the weight off the old walls. The curtains were changed, carpets were extended, every detail thought by her as if redesigning her own life. In the garden, she planted new flowers, daisies, tulips, some roses that I bought with her. I would stay in the corner, watching, holding the tools, arranging the things that needed to be lifted or planted. And with each simple gesture of hers, a smile appeared on her face. The smell of coffee in the morning seemed sweeter, and the silence of the house was no longer overwhelming. Now it was welcoming. Neighbors began to appear, first a timid nod, then more smiles, help with small tasks, advice on which flowers would best adapt to the weather. It seemed as if the whole neighborhood was hugging Hannah back, as if acknowledging that this house was finally under the right care. She went back to answering messages, reactivated friendships, reorganized her schedule, and even changed her phone number, rebuilding her personal space. Every little change was a quiet victory. I realized with a heart heavy with pride that she was going back to being the Hannah she was before Craig, confident, light, master of her own destiny. There was no speech, no need for revenge, just the new beginning, simple and pure. That's it. That was enough. But even in this moment of peace, I felt that something was yet to come. One last detail, a missing piece that could make everything fall into place completely. And I knew the story was not yet over. Want to know what happened next? Stay with me, because the final revelation will transform everything you thought you had ever seen. I was sitting on the porch, the old swing creaking under my weight, watching Hannah hang clothes on the clothesline. Her every move felt like a slow dance of regained freedom. The wind blew softly, shaking the leaves of the newly planted garden, and the aroma of the flowers mingled with the smell of the coffee I still held in the mug. I thought of all the years I had tried to protect her with gifts, with advice, with my silent presence, but none of this had been enough without courage. The house I bought for her, full of windows, white walls, and sunny gardens, was just a structure. The real gift was not in the keys I handed over, but in the strength she found within herself to claim her own space. I remembered my wife, the way she would smile at her daughter's determination. "She's strong," I would have said, and in that thought I felt a warmth in my chest, as if we were all there together. I looked at the portraits on the living room wall, our past, our memories, our laughter frozen in photographs, and realized that every pain, every struggle, every strategic silence had been worth it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt at peace. The house, which had already been invaded and taken, now breathed again. So did Hannah. She walked through the yard, adjusting the clothesline, and her smile lit up every corner. I understood that the real victory was not in expelling the invaders, nor in doing legal or emotional justice. It was to see her take charge of her life, rebuild her identity, feel the owner of her space. I whispered to myself, it was worth it. Every effort, every tear, every night of worry had turned into wisdom. The pain we felt together turned into strength. I looked around, at the blooming garden, at the house that was finally hers, at the portraits that now had full meaning, and I knew that my mission was accomplished. Hannah no longer needed me as a guardian. She needed only her own courage, and at that moment, I could finally relax, feeling that the old soldier, after so many battles, could rest. But even so, deep down, my heart knew that some of life's lessons never end. I asked myself, how does each of us find the courage we need to transform pain into freedom? And it was in this thought that I realized that Hannah and mine's story, although full of conflicts and struggles, was also a mirror for anyone who has ever felt that they have lost everything and had to fight silently to regain what really mattered. Autumn painted the facade of the house with golden and reddish tones, and I was sitting next to Hannah on the porch, each with their own cup of hot coffee. The light wind swayed the leaves, and the sunlight illuminated the garden she had so lovingly cared for. Hannah received a call from an old friend and smiled, that laugh I hadn't heard in a long time. Light, genuine, full of life. I held my cup tight, watching her, feeling that every detail of that moment was proof that everything we went through was worth it. Craig and Audrey had disappeared from the neighborhood, and now they were just rumors of a hushed-up scandal. The justice we sought did not need courts nor shouts, but was established in the soul, silent and firm. I didn't need to be recognized, nor would applause make me feel better. What mattered was the truth of what we built. The house breathing Hannah's strength again, her courage in taking charge of her life. And that's where the lesson I want to share comes in. Sometimes, as much as we try to protect those we love, the greatest gift we can give is not a house, nor possessions, nor words. It is trusting in their inner strength. It is allowing them to find the courage to fight for themselves. And you, who listen to me now, may have already felt this same responsibility, this same fear and hope. Thank you for staying with me this far, for opening your heart to this story. If this video brought something to you, leave a like. Think of it as a hug that warms up and supports this channel. Sign up, as if it were an invitation to come back for the next coffee with me. Comment from which city you are watching, because I want to meet you. Feel this community growing, and don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss it when the coffee's ironed again. But before we say goodbye, let me tell you, the next true story that appears on the screen will shake everything you believe about generosity, pain, and silent justice. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.